So it's the other green holiday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, 2015. No offense to any of my Irish fans out there, we love you. But 420 is our real green holiday here, and especially when you have an Italian Jew running the meetup. So anyway, we're going to talk today about a really interesting topic, and the reason I say it's interesting is because it's one of the topics that I think is going to continue to fly underneath the radar for at least the next couple of years, and then it's going to hit everybody like a ton of bricks. So I want to just start I want to be the guy waking everybody up to this now and how drastic it's going to impact the industry. And this is about synthetic marijuana, and this is a little brief report. I really wanted to get people just the very basics of what we're talking about here and its potential impact on the industry. And what's interesting to me, before I've been in the industry a long time, people know that, and therefore when I see certain things like in the game, I recognize certain tendencies and I see certain things, they kind of stand out to me, whereas sometimes it may not necessarily stand out to somebody that hasn't been playing the game for a long time. It's kind of like when I'm going to use football as an analogy. Like a guy like Bill Belichick is known as the greatest coach of all time. When he watches a game, he sees different things in the game than other people see in the game because his ability to evaluate and analyze. And one of the things that I think enables me to really do that in this business is to really figure out like what's going on and what's going to happen in the future, is that I really started to understand how the media pushes narratives and how corporations drive politicians, and how all these laws are actually written to benefit corporations, and they're all negotiations between who's going to get hurt the most, who's going to get hurt the least, who's going to win the most, and who's going to win the least. And it all becomes that battle. And you start to realize through being in the industry that the highest bidder wins the love of the politician, and ultimately funds the marketing campaign, which pushes the votes to get certain politicians into power. And I want to give you a great example. I live in a Korean town. We've had an Italian mayor in the town as long as you can remember. The population in the town is about 75 to 80% Korean, and they've never had a Korean mayor. Now, logic would indicate that the voting process would be Korean people voting for Korean people and they'd win every time. But just so you see how corporations can sway things and make things change, it's very, very interesting. And if you came to my Korean town, this is an affluent Korean town that have literally so much money that it's become a very small town with 2 and even 3 layers of apartments risen in this little pocket because of the amount of money that's flowing through that town. And the reason it is because the Samsung Northeast headquarters is located less than a mile away, which is the largest company in South Korea. So most of their employees are living right in my town. If you drove down the main street of my town, you would see nothing but buildings with Korean writing in it. There's nothing written in English. Yet there's been an Italian mayor in my town since the beginning of time. And everybody who lives there is Korean. They're not voting for an Italian, but he's winning every single time. So it's just it's an eye-opener when you see certain things. And I want to have that conversation first, because before we talk about synthetic marijuana, we have to talk about the narrative phrase synthetic marijuana, okay? They call it synthetic cannabinoids. They call it synthetic marijuana. What it ultimately is a term that was brought forth by them. Just like the word marijuana is a term brought forth by them, it doesn't really exist. Cannabis is a plant that we've scientifically named as cannabis. Marijuana is a word that we've talked about as what I believe to be create a diversion to make people believe that cannabis doesn't actually exist. It's a word that comes from the people, but hardly ever from the media. So, with synthetic marijuana, the first thing to note is it was a chemical formed in the United States by a guy from Clemson University. His name was John W. Huffman. And The chemical JWH-018 is a chemical that was made to act on the CB1 cannabinoid receptor. So what's interesting about the drug is it goes straight to your endocannabinoid system. And what we know about cannabis is we have millions of cannabinoid receptors, right? And they impact all areas of the brain, millions of them. Goes right down the spinal cord. And it impacts greatly that area. What we also know about cannabis, it doesn't THC, is it doesn't interrupt the brainstem. It doesn't have any interaction with the brainstem. Okay, with JWH-018, not only does it bind like lock and key to the receptor, it's almost like a high-powered magnet. So it like when the chemical comes in, it binds 5 times as strong than THC actually does. Okay, wow. Yeah. And if you look at the paper and you see the two molecules, just look. If you just took a quick glance at how similar they look to each other, they look very, very similar at first glance. They have that little squiggly line all the way to the right, and they've got just a similarity in their structure. Versus underneath it, you see the endogenous chemical anandamide, which also binds to the CB1 receptor, which doesn't look anything like THC or like JWH-018. Now, some people don't know what anandamide is and how it relates to THC, but basically, I've learned a whole lot more about anandamide through learning about JWH-018. Anandamide, when our body creates it as an endogenous chemical, and it binds in the CB1 receptor, it's a completely natural occurrence. And general science has been saying to us for some time now that essentially the two molecules are the same. That's kind of a lie. Like, after seeing JWH-018 and how it's actually was designed structurally in a laboratory to look almost like THC, you can clearly see that anandamide doesn't look anything like it. So that would deduce to me that what THC, based on my knowledge of my overall knowledge of cannabis, my hypothesis is that when the body receives THC from the cannabis plant, it doesn't have the same effects as anandamide does on the body. I don't believe that cannabis would have designed a chemical which has the healing properties that it does to duplicate all of the chemicals that anandamide has. I think it would try to make other chemicals that maybe anandamide isn't dealing with, or maybe a more concentrated version of what anandamide is. So we don't have this understanding yet. We don't have this research available. But what we do know, what is very interesting to me, is how it has become like the general narrative. And I keep bringing these things up, is that anandamide and THC is basically like the same thing, and that's why it doesn't alter our brains, and that's why it's also natural. It really doesn't. And the reason that's significant is that we now know, as of December of this past year, that white truffles, which are the most expensive consumed piece of produce anywhere on Earth, has actual anandamide chemicals in the truffles. And that is why the truffles are the most expensive thing on Earth. And it was only found in like early December of this year by a Dr. Mauro Maccarone in Italy, that this is why like pigs and dogs have been used to sniff these things, because they possess this exact structure of anandamide. So what's interesting about it is when our brain uses cannabis, and we're being told that THC is the same thing as anandamide, more or less. It's really not. It binds to the CB1 receptor like anandamide, but that is honestly, I believe, one of the very few things it has in common with anandamide.
Anandamide and truffle as well?
No, but chocolate does. Cacao.
How is it? I can
It impacts the endocannabinoid system, especially when you use cannabis with it. Like it impacts the endocannabinoid system. Yeah. But guys, this is what I mean by getting your mind blown. I want you to think for a second the implications of this, right? We've basically been told that anandamide and THC are more or less similar in the same, but another natural substance exists, another plant, which is truffles, which has the actual molecule. If we want the exact health effects, we would need the exact molecule. We look at a molecule that looks far similar to THC that can actually kill you, right?
Yeah.
And this one looks nothing like THC, and it's natural. So it goes to show that this has actually been, this is, by the way, when you use the word synthetic, and understand that this actual molecule was derived from THC.
Right.
People don't realize that. This molecule was designed of metabolites of THC in the
Reverse engineered.
What?
Like reverse engineered.
They reverse engineered THC, in other words, to create this chemical. Now, the issue I have with that is there are a lot of chemicals. When you're dealing directly with somebody's endocannabinoid system, you can truly kill somebody. The cannabis plant has gone out of its way not to do that. Okay, it designed its biochemistry to be non-toxic and not hurt us.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have receptors in the brainstem that cause us to have seizures and vomit and die. This does hit the brainstem and will cause people to have seizures and vomit and die. Okay? And it has been doing it all over America. Now, the problem with it is if you just modify an element here and an element there, you've now changed the structure of the molecule, and it can remain legal. Okay? So this makes it impossible for law enforcement to control, because if you just basically chart out in advance 100 different formulas of how to make this molecule and provide in advance all the different chemicals to do so, all it takes is every month we just make a new molecule, boom, like on rotation, like a new magazine subscription, and you can never make a test for it because you don't know what's coming out next. Right. So guys, the point of this meetup today was to let everybody know that this is the new marijuana. This is the old alcohol. This is the new war on drugs. This is extremely scary to me because, number one, to me, by calling it synthetic marijuana, that is the narrative.
Well, sometimes it's not, they use it synonymously. They call it marijuana, and then you have to dig in and then see, wait a minute, that's not marijuana.
Exactly. That's part of it. The media does it in the headlines, and then you find out, oh, it was synthetic.
Yeah.
Right? There are people. There was a guy in the UK. A guy died on it.
The whole article is marijuana. Yeah.
The whole article is marijuana. First, it was penned the first person to ever die from marijuana.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And then it goes viral. Start posting this stuff.
And actually, the DEA and the drug showed that of chemicals that for medical uses this product.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's scary. Yeah. Oh yeah. You're right. Yeah.
6 months, 8 months ago.
So, let me tell you about the supply chain and how this whole thing is going on down. In China, it's legal to make JWH 018. So just to show you how weird our world is and how corrupt it is politically and through corporations, listen to this chain of loopholes. That is ridiculous, okay? All right? Number one, it's legal to make it in China. So that's the first, red flag. The news who's gone after China to explain this has had absolutely no cooperation from China. They're not interested in talking about it. Why in the world that they would allow this to happen, right? Then from China, it goes shipped to Europe with nothing to block it from going to Europe.
Yep.
Once it goes to Europe, it gets shipped to either through NAFTA or
They
CAFTA, which is the
probably
Central
branded-
American Free Trade
They brand it
Agreement.
in
Yeah,
Europe probably, then it becomes, it sounds already like, oh, it's coming from Europe.
that's what happens.
It's
It
coming from
comes.
Europe all of a sudden.
That's what happens. It comes in bulk chemical to Europe, pretty much through Amsterdam, is where I'm convinced majority of this is taking place in Amsterdam,
Probably UK.
Copenhagen, and the UK,
Yeah,
and definitely the UK,
yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah, GW
And-
is
It's legal in all of those places.
Yes, it is.
well, especially synthetic ones.
Yes, it is. And
No, I mean the synthetic ones, not
the synthetics are,
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're branding it there, all after kids. Everything is completely for kids. Everything is labeled properly, so not for human consumption. This is purely for research purposes. All the chemicals are chemicals just for research purposes. It's the excuse used for everything to get this through borders, right? And then it goes right through Central America or NAFTA, and then therefore it can come right through. Now, I mean, come on, guys. How do you have that many open loops like this if it's not being controlled at the global level?
Yeah.
So this is the shit that pisses me off. I've never cursed on camera, but I have to. All right. So anyway, this is the perfect drug for law enforcement. It keeps people employed. It always changes. This is like the feather in their cap. They thought cannabis was going to keep them employed and fat and happy forever. Now that that's failing, they're using this. But what they've done is they've done the next best thing. They've used science to convince you and I that anandamide and THC are the same thing. And then they've labeled something synthetic marijuana, which binds to the endocannabinoid system, essentially convincing you that anything that's marijuana is not similar to the body in terms of the way that medical science is talking about it. So it makes it more palatable for people to be using regular marijuana, making it more ideal for kids to think about, oh, if I can use marijuana, I can use this other substance.
Right.
The problem is that all these different chemicals that are being made in cement mixers. They take a whole bunch of bullshit herb, not even marijuana, like whatever types of cannabis. They put it into a cement mixer. They throw in all the disgusting chemicals in there that'll kill you, and they just blend it up in a cement mixer and they bundle it for sale.
It's coming from China. It's probably Chinese hemp. They're probably using that.
So that's what the carrier plant is? That's carrying...
The carrier
Herb
plant,
blend.
nobody ever really talks. It's an herbal blend of some sort. Nobody really talks about but it's.
Sage
But I've
and
heard forensic scientists, and I've talked to people who use this. They say it doesn't really look like most cannabis. Like if you saw it like shake, and some certain shake might look like it, but generally speaking, it would look like leafy shake, like potpourri, like whatever. It's not really like it doesn't.
Like catnip almost.
Right. The point is, it's really not okay. If you want to say marijuana, think about it. Now, some people have actually been nice enough to call it synthetic cannabinoids. I'm okay with that, but not synthetic marijuana because it's not a fake plant.
Right.
Yeah, it's really misleading.
It's a plant that's sprayed with a bunch of chemicals.
Yeah, it's not marijuana plant.
But they're calling it synthetic marijuana because it goes right into the probe industry. Because how do we know? Hold on a minute. Let me give you an example. The next time somebody gets pulled over on the street, gets into an interaction with a cop that causes a cop to kill them, and they test the person, and they find out the person was on marijuana, and then we find out later, oh no, it was misreported as synthetic marijuana after the damage was done in the media. After the damage was done to the industry and the media. Okay,
that is going to happen.
That is what has already happened. You go and you listen to Kevin Sabet speak.
Yeah.
He will tell you in his base presentation, the 7 Myths of Marijuana, he says flat out, if you look at every major interaction between a person and a cop in the last couple of years where a person was getting violent towards a cop, which led to the death of that person, every single one of those people was on marijuana. And then he says, but I'm not saying that marijuana would have the power to do that. I'm just saying that's just the way it is. So, I mean, he's clearly setting up the future for a time, as this is right now a $7 billion a year business globally. Which means that's a lie. that means it's a $21 billion a year business globally, because they always misreport the drugs at a very low level so that people don't think it's a big problem. Okay, they did it with marijuana in the 80s. They're doing it today with this new shit. This is their excuse for unions to grow, for law enforcement to expand, and I just want to read to you the narrative, okay? Because this is the narrative based on what I actually heard a DEA spokesman say in an interview, okay? JWH-018 comes from China, where it's legal to produce, shipped to Europe, imported through NAFTA and CAFTA by the internet drug dealers in the U.S., and sold to Middle Eastern gas stations and head shop operators, who then send the money back to their country to fund terrorism. It's a vicious circle. Now, isn't that so convenient? Isn't it so convenient that this magical substance appears that nobody can trace? It keeps law enforcement and military working, and that money just happens to fund terrorism. How convenient, you know?
Not the cigarettes that they sell.
I mean, if this isn't just like, if this isn't a propagandist's dream substance, you know, we can confuse the public that marijuana is doing this. We can make them think that cannabis is bad, continue to fund prohibition because of this, continue to keep cops on the street. This is all why this is out of control. Okay, now, I'm going to wrap this up. Why would people use this? First of all, the name makes it sound like cannabis, which many kids get involved young. It seems totally normal. Right. Especially with now everybody using cannabis, it's becoming legal. You're going to have a lot of...
sell it under names of popular strains.
Yeah, I see it. Yep, Northern Lights. I see it named after cannabis. They don't care. I've seen it Scooby Snacks. I've seen pictures of Scooby-Doo on the packages. You know? You know what? You know what's been happening? People have been making edibles with the shit and dying. That's the problem. This is synthetic. That's what that. All right, I gotta tell you the story. All right, I gotta tell you the story. We're here till 2 o'clock. I'll make it quick. This is really sick, right? So this guy seems like a really cool guy who's into psychedelics, right? So he's so into psychedelics, taking them himself, medical and recreational. Him and his bunch of people are all into it. They all report on their different interactions, all this. So he decides he wants to start getting to the business and supply the community legally by dancing around all the different controlled substance acts, right? By doing pretty much what these people are doing. He's the one who's initiating it. What happened was he was selling it in bulk chemical, and he was labeling and packaging everything in his own labeling and packaging, right? He sold the chemicals, got out to some kid in North Dakota who was in turn buying them and then selling them on the street to the kids in school. Some kid broke into it. I guess the kid must have been making so much money off this stuff, because it's definitely a way stronger high than cannabis, because you're using all sorts of weird chemicals, right? So he's making a fortune killing it in North Dakota, where nobody's got anything else to do besides meth. And you know, these states are they're making so much money off the drug distribution in these states. It's unbelievable. And anyway, getting back to it. So some kid breaks into his house, steals the chemicals, makes edibles out of them like they're marijuana chocolates, but they're synthetic marijuana chocolates. Gives them out at a party. These kids think that they're just marijuana edibles. One kid, one of the top football players in the entire university, straight-laced kid, great student. The other kid, just a nice kid. 2 different parties, doing 2 different things, both from the same kid who stole the powder, made the chocolates. One kid and the other kid decided to trip together, take the chocolates together. Thought they were mushroom chocolates. He was told that they were mushroom chocolates, excuse me, not cannabis chocolates, but they were made with the synthetic cannabinoids. One kid had the most ridiculous trip of his life, said that it was out of control. But he said he just kept telling himself, it's just mushrooms, I'll be okay. The other kid totally was freaking out, and he was in no condition to take care of the other kid.
Right.
So the other kid dies of a seizure. And then he calls the ambulance after the kid dies. Sad, right?
Sad.
The other kid never really was known to even do drugs. Dies. Same night, right? this is all happening. This is going to become a huge thing in America because this is being passed right through the head shops,
Yeah.
and a lot of cops are going to get rich because of this, and this just pisses me off, you know. And
What gives them the legal right to call it synthetic cannabis? The molecular structure of the cannabinoids?
because it is a molecular structure of a cannabinoid. It can be, there can be a law that says you can't call it that.
Right.
We would have to bring that law forth
Yeah.
that says you must create another name
Right,
for it.
but the
Just
politicians
because
are-
it's a drug that interacts directly with the endocannabinoid system, it doesn't mean it should be ever associated with cannabis. But this, again, is the reason why I fight against the word marijuana.
Yeah.
So, second, all the marketing is in place to make it easy to obtain. I mean, here's the amazing part of it. It comes looking like it's in the Pop Rocks bag. It's all labeled after like kid stuff and marijuana strains. All the marketing is there. You can distribute it online. You know, nobody can find the people who sell it. This is the perfect drug for law enforcement to enforce for life. It beats all drug tests. Therefore, the user would want to use it too. I mean, if you're the user and you're somebody in the military, let me give you an example of some people who would want to use this. People that are in the military, people that are teachers, police officers, people that are on probation, prisoners, they all would want to use this if they just want to have their basic right to, their human right to want to alter your consciousness, right? But not being denied that access. So you'll seek anything that you need possible to do it, and you just hope that this isn't going to kill you. But you have no idea which one is going to be a lethal one, or who's going to douse your chocolates with this shit and murder you.
Yeah,
Crazy.
it's easy.
That scares the shit out of me. How do you know what's going to happen? You know that there's going to be shit planted in dispensaries. You know that there's going to be stories coming out of dispensaries where people went, they had something mixed into their edibles that was not what they thought it was going to be. You know, this is just an inevitability of this industry. I can see this going into a million different ways of disaster by naming it synthetic cannabinoids, calling it synthetic marijuana. Just because it is a substance that interacts with the endocannabinoid system, the narrative is wrong. You know, that's the problem. And it impacts our business. And it's all marketed to kids. And with my opinion, it solidifies the gateway drug theory. Because it basically says, you see, guys, we told you marijuana was the mother of all drugs. It was, look at what was derived from this evil thing called cannabis. Look what we've done, you know? It's like, don't blame cannabis for the... wait, hold on a minute. You want to blame cannabis for the fact that we now know that we have an endocannabinoid system, that because of the fact that cannabis gave us the medical knowledge to know that we have a new field of study that can modulate our immune system, regulate homeostasis, deal with our metabolism, wire every single basically part of our body, our circulatory system. Cannabis gave us knowledge that that exists. And you want to turn around and brand this synthetic marijuana because some idiot made a drug that impacts the endocannabinoid system, that I need that to impact my life, when what I'm trying to do is help people become sustainable, become healthy. I need that shit, that narrative from the media. This is coming from our government. This is bullshit. And furthermore, no, I'm just kidding. I'm done. So that's it. I just, yeah.